Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Tuesday, September 22nd, 2009 meeting of the Glendale Redevelopment Agency. Mr. City Clerk, could you call the roll?
Agency members Friedman, Najarian,
Here.
Quintero,
Here.
Weaver,
Here.
Chairman Draymond.
Here. And could we hear your report, please?
The agenda for the September 22nd, 2009 regular meeting of the Glendale Redevelopment Agency was posted on Thursday, September 17, 2009 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Kasakian. Our first item?
It's approval of minutes.
I'll move the minutes.
All
Second.
right. We have a motion and a second. I think...
One abstention.
We have one abstention. Right. Noting that abstention, the minutes will stand approved as presented. Our next item.
Next item is oral communications. I don't believe that there were any cards submitted for oral communications.
All right. Let me note that agency member Friedman has joined us. All right. I will close oral communications then and move on to the next item, please.
On the business agenda at 6A is Director of Development Services regarding agency-owned property located at 216 South Brand Boulevard. A letter of intent between the agency and the Museum of Neon Art. At 6A1 is a motion approving proposed lease terms contained in the letter of intent with the Museum of Neon Art and MONA and authorizing staff to prepare a ground lease agreement.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's go to Phil Lansafame, Director of Development Services.
Mr. Chairman, members of the agency, we are very pleased to bring to you a letter of intent between the Redevelopment Agency and the Museum of Neon Art. It is also our opportunity to introduce the museum to you and to the Glendale community. We're going to have a few people participate in the presentation, hope to give you a history and a little bit of the idea, the concept behind what the museum brings to Glendale. Just as a bit of a housekeeping, as you listen to the presentation, when we refer to 216 South Brand, we're referring to the parcel that actually has that and the parcel to the north in our conversation with the museum. The agency is in negotiations to purchase that property. We'll make sure that we clarify that in the letter of intent. So without any further ado, let me introduce Emil Tatavosian, Deputy Director of Development Services, to introduce to you Mona, and then they'll give you a bit of a presentation as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tatavosian.
Mr. Chair, members of the agency, today is actually a very exciting day for us. It's not very often that we get to discuss or present a concept for a museum for your consideration, especially a museum of this caliber. The concept of a museum in downtown actually dates back to almost the GDSP, the Greater Downtown Strategic Plan, adopted in '96, then reconfirmed with the Downtown Specific Plan in 2006, and then again reconfirmed in our current implementation plan. Just as a way of background, the subject property 216 South Brand and the adjacent property to the south, 218 South Brand, were acquired back in 2004 with the intent of implementing a passageway, a pedestrian passageway connection from at that time, the town center, now the Americana, on the west to the civic uses located on the east, which include obviously the Central Library, the ARC, the Central Park, and now hopefully the museum. We always thought that the connector, for it to be successful, it needs to have an active use, and we looked at both of the properties, and it seemed the property to the south, 218 South Brand, which directly aligns with Caruso Avenue, and the parking lot south of the Central Library seems to be the logical location for the passageway because it makes a visual connection. It has a clear visual connection from the Americana to the library and vice versa. And as such, we started thinking about potential reuse of the 216 South Brand property. That's where Mona came in. We have had the pleasure of experimenting or exploring this idea with the Mona board, whom I'll introduce in a minute. We sort of thought about the potential needs of the museum and tried to see how it fits into the current building. Part of their Wish list includes high ceilings, large openings where their large collection could be transported in and out, a lot of power to energize their wonderful collection. And it seems all these requirements could be potentially available at 216 South Brand. Currently, the LOI that has been submitted for your review, the lease terms involve a 15-year rental structure that starts out with basically starts out with a zero rent and then steps up gradually to a $7,500 monthly rate at about the 10th year. They are seeking a $1 million assistance towards tenant improvements. At this point, we are seeking approval from the agency to enter into the letter of intent so that Mona can begin their fundraising campaign for a permanent home in Glendale. Unless you have questions for me, I'd like to introduce the board and let them introduce Mona and the history and what wonderful things they bring to our community.
All right. Let me turn to my colleagues and see if there are any questions for Emil at this time. No.
With me are Ms. Kim Koga, the Executive Director, Ms. Kathy Foley, and Mr. David Svensson. And Kim will do the introductions, and in the meantime, I'll hand out the wonderful package that they've put together for your review.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Wait till these get passed out. We're going to have a little slideshow going on with this just for your enjoyment. It's not...
May I ask you, Ms. Koga, could you state your name just for the record?
Oh, sure. Kim Koga.
Thank you.
Go ahead and start. Okay, all right. We're very excited about the possibility of the Museum of Neon Art making its home in the city of Glendale, and we think this match presents some unique opportunities for growth for both Glendale and Mona. To give you a brief background of Neon and Mona, in 1981, the museum was founded in downtown Los Angeles by two neon artists who were intimately aware of neon's history as an art form. In its heyday, the neon sign industry attracted the top designers in the United States and required skilled craftsmen to make the glass tubing that's filled with the neon gas by hand, as it is still done today. Artists in the United States, including Bruce Nauman, Stephen Antonakis, and Keith Saunier, to name a few, embraced the use of neon for art making starting in the 1960s. Today, neon installations and sculpture occupy a prominent place in the collections of the world's major contemporary art museums. As a museum, Mona celebrates both the historic neon signage as an art form, as well as the contemporary luminous sculpture made from neon and other types of illumination. Our first home was our founder's studio on Traction Avenue, where we operated for 12 years. We were then invited to move to City Walk, where we operated for 4 years, before returning back to downtown LA in 1997, in an area near what is now called LA Live. But when Mona was there, it was more like LA waiting to come alive, which it finally did at the termination of our 10-year lease agreement. We are currently leasing temporary space in the Old Bank District. While it's in a great walking neighborhood in the middle of downtown LA's Gallery Row and has the urban environment that we like, the small space does not allow us to present our unique collection and programming in its entirety. Mona has 80 neon signs in a collection that is continually expanding. We've included a partial list of our collection in the packet we've handed to you today. 17 signs, including some of the largest and most iconic, have been on display at Universal City Walk since 1994. Among them are the three-dimensional Richfield Eagle rooftop sign, the classic Steely's Motel sign, and the Melrose Theater bulb sign that dates from the 1920s. We currently have about 20 signs on view in our downtown space, which include the RCA Victor sign, a 20-foot suspended diver, and the marquee from the Venice Fox Theater. The remaining 40 signs are in storage, and these, to mention a few, include the 30-foot Grauman's Chinese Theater Dragon, the famous Hollywood and Vine Brown Derby sign, and an early enamel drug sign from Eagle Rock, and many more. As you can see, Mona needs a permanent location to display these historic gems and literally bring them back into the light. In addition to preserving neon signs in our museum collection, Mona has also worked with the City of Los Angeles and private funders in a project called Lumens, which stands for the Living Urban Museum of Electric and Neon Signs, that restores historic neon signs throughout the community. One of the attractions of making our home in Glendale is that Glendale's history is connected with and tied into the neon legacy of Los Angeles. Two of our signs, the La Fonda restaurant sign, which appeared on the cover of a book about LA neon, and our Zinke's shoe repair sign were both from Glendale. We would love to create a project called Lumens on Brand, in which we identify, document, restore, or rebuild Glendale's historic neon gems. Because much of the history of neon signs was based around America's love of the automobile, we would like to incorporate a program with the auto dealerships along Lower Brand Boulevard into automobile roadside-themed exhibitions and/or events which would draw visitors to the dealerships, to Glendale, and to the museum. To reach a broad segment of the population and to promote Los Angeles's historic ties to the art of neon, we conduct nighttime bus tours showcasing the historic neon and architecture of Los Angeles. Known as the Neon Cruise, it has been a popular and award-winning tour. We hope to create a self-guided driving tour of Glendale's neon, past and present, for museum visitors, tourists, and locals alike. An additional programming idea is to work with a local travel agency to conduct tours to visit the neon in foreign countries, for example, to Germany or Hong Kong, or nationally to Alaska to view the Aurora Borealis, which is nature's neon light show. Neon is an educational tool in the areas of art, design, and history, as well as electricity, physics, and chemistry. Over the years, we have witnessed people of all ages, backgrounds, and nationalities become fascinated by the many facets of neon. We hope to share this rich medium with schools throughout Glendale and the surrounding school districts by developing a mobile trailer outfitted with a neon facility and educational demonstrations and exhibitions. But the central reason we're so excited about a move to Glendale is because of the dynamic potential of the location. With a state-of-the-art retail complex across the boulevard and a cultural library and park complex adjacent, Mona would be in the best possible scenario as part of this mix of retail and culture-based attractions. And it's a no-brainer to see the thematic connection of the name Americana with neon. Neon is Americana. In the event we do move forward with the proposal today, we have made arrangements with Jill Bensley of JB Research Company to do a market study for the museum to help us map out a plan to facilitate the move. We believe that creating a partnership with the community will be a win-win situation for Glendale and Mona. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Koga. Did you have, I have speaker cards from you, from Kathy Foley, and from David Svensson. Did you want to speak in that order? Or?
I think David.
I think David actually.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
In case you have a question for.
all right. Let me see if there are questions for Ms. Koga first. All right. Let's
Thank
move
you.
on to David Svensson.
Hello, my name is David Svensson. Thank you for letting us come here and present our proposal to you. I'm on the board of the Museum Board of Trustees. Our mission statement is the Museum of Neon Art encourages learning and curiosity through the preservation, collection, and interpretation of neon art. Neon, those of you who might be wondering, a museum dedicated to neon? Going back to our childhoods, we all have deep embedded stereotypes of what neon is. Las Vegas, Times Square, Route 66 motels, drive-ins, local watering holes, and questionable neighborhoods, all illuminated and part of the American dream. Mona is dedicated to the preservation and documentation of the most artful examples of this history. Neon, a small word for an advertisement industry that has illuminated with a rainbow palette every country on the planet. Neon is just one gas used of the 5 noble gases connected to the luminous tube, In fact, the industry uses more argon than neon due to its larger color selection. These inert gases are natural elements that are mixed with the air we breathe. The aurora borealis and lightning are the most dramatic examples of neon. Glass, an amazing material in itself, from the vacuum tubes of German-born Heinrich Geissler, made in the late 1800s, to the contemporary artist Dale Chihuly. Mona honors their creative curiosity with glass and illumination. Electricity, the static discharge. Inventor Nikola Tesla, an immigrant from Yugoslavia, is the key that sparks our light, the key pioneer that sparks our light. The noble gases, the contained conductor that activates this magical light in the realms of physics, mystery, and creativity. These three media are what make neon an artful science that stimulates, educates, amuses, and provokes. Mona's collection of contemporary art and rotating exhibits are as diverse as the country we live in. Exciting, thought-provoking, stimulating, and fun are the feedback we get from visitors worldwide. Mona is about educating both youth and adults in the aesthetics, craft, and the science of how these gases, with an electrical discharge, became a dominant light source that has graced commerce, churches, temples, mosques, and museums throughout the world. In behalf of the Museum of Neon Art Board of Trustees, I thank you and welcome you to consider inviting Mona as a cultural icon to your community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Svensson. Do we have questions for David Svensson before we... All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. And did you want to speak? You're just here to answer questions if we have some. Okay. All right. Our next speaker is Mike Mohill, followed by Margaret Hammond.
Good afternoon, gentlemen, council members, Mr. Mayor. Wow. This is Glendale's version of the stimulus package. What else can it be? Let me see. Let's just try to figure out this out. Rent at $7,500 a month times 12. Well, 10 times 7,500, is that 7 million? I don't think so. How much is that? Who's the mathematician here?
About 92,000.
How much, please, Mr. Weaver?
90-some thousand.
97,000.
90-some thousand.
90-some. So it's 90. That's for 10. Okay. So we're talking about $1 million a year in rent stuff subsidy for the first 15 years. Wow. I wish I could have a house mortgage that way. This sounds like a loan to General Motors or Chrysler. A stimulus package for the neon industry. Where's Mr. Caruso? I don't see him stalking over here talking how wonderful it's going to be for his neighbor across the street, a garish place. You know, Margaret, you can... Okay, you know, I think this would be a great place for Montrose, where the Trader Joe would be. If we need stimulus, Mr. Dramey, you always talk about you need something good for Montrose. Why don't we locate it there in the Montrose Park? It'd bring a lot of people. It might even have more space for parking. There's no parking across the street from the Americana. Where would people park? At the Adult Center? Would Mr. Caruso allow people to park in his parking lot? Would they go across to the Galleria? Man alive. Jesus. With $1 million in subsidy, we could go ahead and hire some more policemen and firemen. The list goes on and on. This is a bad deal. This is a perfect example of why we need to have council districts. council districts would never allow this because the councilmen in South Glendale would not want to see a garish building across from them. Excuse me. And that's what we're going to have, is a garish building. The Americana is a classy building, and you want garish. But the main thing is the cost of this new white elephant. Am I angry? Yes. Because I'm paying taxes. You raise my utility bills. This is going to cost more money in utilities. This electricity is going to be out of sight. The total cost is in the millions, and the people in Glendale are starving, unemployed.
Okay. Can you conclude, please, Mr.
I've made my conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, our next speaker is Margaret Hammond.
Good afternoon,
Good afternoon.
members of the redevelopment. Anyway, it's all right. My name is Margaret Hammond, and I'm here to oppose this money, this funding for this museum. Number one, thinking in terms of financial, LA withdrew their support because of the earning deficit of $90,000 last year. Hello, why are we picking up, as I say, another white elephant to spend our money on? And I agree, Montrose would be a great locale because there is parking, and there is no parking where this is being proposed. Let's face it, the valet parking from the Royal Banquet Hall? Is over in the public library. It's on the streets. It even extends over onto Louise Street and even private parking lots along Harvard, to which I belong to a group that I know that this happens. We keep on spending our money on frou-frous, such as Unity Fest and this proposed museum, when we should be having our police department needs more pumping and not taking them down. And the other thing is, who will pay the bills for the energy? That it's going to take a tremendous amount of energy, and we're already in problems. And if there comes another energy crisis, and there's no use, I understand, thinking that we're going to get El Nino, because now they've decided we're not. So we'll be right back to where we were as far as water and power, right? And I don't see why we should keep extending ourselves when we're already in debt. And there are many other things in Glendale that need to be taken care of. Rather than having these type of money spent on this type of thing. When there are people out of work, 12-13% unemployment, and so forth, people losing their homes, and we keep spending money on things that's going to cost us money. It's not going to make us money for the city. I can't believe that when they're already showing a $90,000 deficit in downtown L.A. location, that we're going to be, it's going to come out in the black for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. I'm going to turn to my colleagues in a minute here, but before that, let me ask one of the representatives of Mona to come up for a minute and just address this issue of your operating at a $90,000 deficit.
That's
and
news
that's why
to me.
LA, I assume from the look on your face that
Yeah, I've not heard that before.
It's in the news press.
Oh, well. Well,
Do you have the article with you?
let me. You
really
can't
not.
do a back and forth
Yeah.
from the podium to the audience, but that is not what the article said anyway. But regardless, to your knowledge, as the executive director of a museum of
We're not
neon
in a
art, you mean you're not operating at a $90,000?
We're struggling, but we're not operating in a deficit.
Okay.
Definitely not that much.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Starbird.
Well, another comment stated as fact, which was, if I heard it correctly, the belief that this is underwriting the rent to the tune of $1 million a year. that is not the case. A full market rent, if you were going to rent the building out, and I'll note that when we first acquired these properties, there was some anticipation it could very well have been for a full passageway and buildings would come down. So in this case, it was looking at an opportunity to bring what your staff believes is a tremendously exciting opportunity to our downtown. The very people that are here criticizing this have in the past criticized the city as to why we can't be more like our neighbor to the southeast here in terms of the kinds of cultural events that we have. Every journey begins with a first step. And this is one that, yes, requires that we have a partnership with Mona and financially in the beginning help underwrite the activity, but not without getting something in return, in addition to having an attraction here in Glendale that we think is very much fitting with this community and where we're going. Also offers tremendous opportunities for helping to activate the passageway, activate the downtown, bring what is a very popular art form in neon to the community in many, many different arenas, and frankly is a first step in starting to bring some of that kind of regional cultural attraction to this community. We think this makes very good economic sense. A building that we would have taken down and frankly had a larger passageway, a good way to engage the community in the passageway in this art form and activate it in ways that we otherwise couldn't.
All right. Don't go far away, Ms. Koga, but I want to, because I'm sure there may be some other questions for you, but you might want to have a seat for a moment. The other issue I just want to raise was one raised by Mr. Mohill about Mr. Caruso. Phil, I don't think I'm carrying tales out of school if I ask you to repeat for the public the question and offer that was directed to me as chair of the agency from some representative of Mr. Caruso's who offered to be here today just in case we wanted him to speak in favor of this. That was from whom?
Rick Lemos, the Vice President of Communications.
For
Caruso affiliated.
Right. So the notion that this is some garish building that they wouldn't like is just, well, in my view, nonsense. Let me turn to my colleagues. Mr. Quintero.
Okay, I'll start by saying how excited and happy and pleased I am that we're taking this big step. It's been months and months, and we're finally to the point where I believe we're going to get an approval. My feeling is that this is the perfect site and the perfect use for this for these two buildings, for these two empty, may I add, for these two empty, decrepit buildings that the city happens to own. So the idea of using one building for this museum and having the other building as an open space and basically activating that side of brand, I think, is just great. It's going to tie in with the Americana, and it will also tie in with the east, with the park. As we begin to develop that, it's just going to be the perfect location to display some of the larger signs. And then I'm also very pleased and very impressed with the actual program itself, whether it's working with the schools, the car dealership, exhibitions, and all of the other things that you have planned. I think that's going to be just a perfect tie-in to general business activities and academic activities here in Glendale. I did have a question, just to be sure, and that is that the open space next to the museum will be used by the Neon Museum. However, that will continue to be a public space. It'll be a pass-through.
That's correct, and we hope to use the neon signage as a way to activate that open space and draw people from the commercial part of downtown into that civic area.
Right. Did you?
Well, let me. Yeah, well, I just want to supplement that by saying we've talked with Mona about also having, as that building fronts on the passageway, openings in that side, so they could do demonstrations and classes on neon art restoration, neon making, out there in that passageway, which even taking just one of the buildings down remains quite a sizable passageway all by itself. So
I believe it's at least 50 feet.
It's 50 feet.
Yeah, so that's a wide space. So we'll continue to have, in essence, what becomes a park, not more than just a passageway. It becomes an active mini park. The classes, I think, are great for adults, for youth, for whoever it is that wants to get involved in designing and learning about neon art. And then finally, let me say I just returned from an 8-day trip to Korea, where I was totally captivated by the LED, LCD artist. I guess that's the best way to describe what's going on. And I traveled all over the country. It wasn't just confined to Seoul. It was generally all over the country. And so I hope that we can somehow, at a certain point, tie in this art, this coming art form, well, coming to the United States, it's already established there, that we can somehow tie that art form to the museum itself. I think it's sort of the juxtaposition between the old and the new and how it all interacts. But at any rate, I'm very, very pleased. I think this is a positive first step, and this is obvious. We, I suppose we would have other possibilities for museums down the line. However, I think this is a perfect choice and just a perfect fit. So I want to thank you all for choosing us and for what I hope will be generally putting Glendale on the map. Thank you.
Friedman.
Well, first, I want to thank the members of the public who came to speak. Even though I don't necessarily agree with you, it's always nice to know that people are engaged and paying attention and care enough to come in and speak. So thank you. And there were some interesting questions brought up in terms of why is the city spending money on this or looking at this, and I wanted to answer that because as you were speaking, I was thinking, it's true, we're not going to make any money on this. But when did making money on something become the goal for the city? I mean, we don't make money on our libraries. We don't make money on our parks. In fact, it costs us money to do that. But we do those things because we believe that it serves a public interest. Your city is not a profit-making enterprise. When we acquire pieces of land, the goal is not to acquire them to put in a Starbucks or to put in a restaurant to where we're going to start making money. It's to do something with them that serves the public good. And in this case, we don't only have an opportunity to serve the public good by bringing in a cultural amenity, Glendale's first museum, but it's also something that would do good because it's in a redevelopment area and could conceivably bring in people to that museum who will then shop in our shops and eat in our restaurants and do all of those things that traditionally redevelopment agencies put their dollars towards. And if you look around at other cities, I was just in San Jose, for instance, and their downtown had been very blighted, and what they did to reinvigorate it was not to go out and put in for-profit enterprises. They already had those failing. What they did instead was to put in museums and cultural amenities. And that's what brought people into their downtown and caused a renaissance in that area and brought people back wanting to live there and people having a reason to go there, and all of the reasons why museums not only make cultural sense and add to your city by making a city that is more interested in doing cultural things, but also help the surrounding businesses. And that's the reason why the Americana has given their support to this project, because they believe that it's a good fit with the Americana because it is featuring a piece of American history that's nostalgic and fits in with their image and will also draw people from the surrounding community. I can tell you from experience, when I first moved to Los Angeles many years ago, one of the first things that I did was to visit the Museum of Neon Art in their old location downtown. So I've been there, and I went there not because I happened to be walking by and it was there, but I sought it out as a destination, and it brought me to a part of the city that I had never been to. So I know from experience that that works. I also hear from people that there's nothing to do in Glendale. When they go out, they want to go to Pasadena. Well, why do they go to the Pasadena? We have the same shops that they have and all of that. I can tell you I've gone there in the past to go to the Norton Simon Museum or to go to the Huntington Gardens. Those are the kinds of things that bring value to a community and make people want to live in a city, those sorts of amenities. I think this museum is a very interesting museum. There's nothing else like it that I know of in the state, maybe even in the country. I think it will bring people from all over the world. maybe not thousands and thousands and thousands. It's not Disneyland, but there are definitely people who will enjoy this. I believe our community will. I definitely believe it will help the downtown businesses. It's not particularly expensive for us. We're using a building that we already own that's vacant. We're doing renovations on a building that's either going to have to be demolished or renovated anyway. They're bringing the collection in. We don't have to go out and acquire a collection. We don't have to start something from zero. We have a museum that needs a place to live. We have a place to live in search of a museum. I think it's a great fit. And lastly, I'd like to thank my colleague, John Draymond, for all of his work for many years trying to bring this project here. And it's only through his tenacity and force of will that, he's able to make this happen. And I thank all of you for your work on this museum. I know it's a labor of love for all of you, and also for saving these great signs. And I know if it wasn't for Mona, a lot of these signs would have been in a dumpster by now. So you've saved a piece of many pieces of American history, and that's a great goal. And one day I really hope to see that display down the Avenue of Cars, because how great would it be to have those historic neon car signs on our Avenue of Cars? I think that it would really help them and just be a great thing for the city.
Thank you. Mr. Najarian?
Thank you. Well, I had the privilege to work with Mr. Draymond and meet with the Mona people, and saw this concept develop and become a reality. And I was very much in favor of it. The only question that I have now is the changed circumstances with the state budget and their rating of our redevelopment dollars, which just occurred recently. And we're putting in $1 million to renovate the building. Are we at any risk for the state's threat to take our redevelopment money away from us? And would this $1 million investment be any greater chunk than we thought it would be in terms of our overall budget?
Mr. Chairman, members of the agency, we have, in looking at the potential take of state money and the funding of CIP projects, we have included this and figured it in our budget and allowed some bit of cushion should this happen again in future years. So to answer your question, I think very simply is we can afford to do this. One of the things that Ms. Friedman raised is it's a building, so it allows us to help the museum without using cash. There will be some upgrades to the building that are done, but in the end, it is a piece of land that we would be using to help the assistance.
Mr. Starbird.
Yes, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Najarian, we should keep in mind that had we proceeded with the original plan, which was a 100-foot wide passageway, there would have been considerable costs associated with the part that the building remains on, the cost of taking the building down and turning that into something. I think, what's the estimate we have currently, Emil, on development of the remaining 50-foot passageway? About $1 million for that?
Yeah.
It's about $1 million. So assume the $1 million that we've committed to the building and the interior improvements and getting it in the form for the museum, we would have likely have spent that tearing out the building and building something in there, and then we likely wouldn't have had the activation. We would have had to do something even more beyond that to get the kind of activation that Mona will bring. So as we looked at this on staff from a pure financial standpoint, this was like we were going to spend the money whether Mona was there or not. Yes, the rent subsidy can be viewed as a subsidy, but that building was going to be torn down. This generates some income possibly from a building we would have torn down. We don't have to put the physical improvements in that half. They activate the half that we do put in, and we have the prospect of getting some decent rents on this building long term. So from that standpoint, just looking at the dollars and cents, this seemed to be a big home run all the way around.
Can you come back to us at a later meeting and discuss what the state budget issues are with our redevelopment funding, whether we need to worry about that or whether we're in good shape?
Mr. Starbird, let me just jump in here. I think that is a very good point, irrespective of Mona. Mr. Najarian's request is something that we should be talking about regardless of points of view with regard to this particular project, I think a lot of people want to know, a lot of our residents and people who have interest in the downtown area want to know where we sit today with regard to the redevelopment dollars that exist, where they can go, and how the state budget is going to impact all of that, or potentially stands to impact that. Yes.
Mr. Chair, I just might remind everyone, we did have a follow-up after the budget was put together on the implications of both the redevelopment take and the general fund take on our redevelopment as well as our general fund and the capital improvement program. We'll bring all of that back in because that is still a rather dynamic process. But I do want to say that as we prepared that budget, anticipating the potential take by the state, we continue to assign the Mona project a very high priority for the reasons I just stated. We've been obligated to do a passageway. That's been part of the long-term plan. And from a purely economic standpoint, we would need to spend this money to generate a 100-foot wide passageway that would be even harder to activate than the present 50-foot passageway. So this really answers really two of those challenges with the same dollars. That's why we left it in the budget as a high priority.
Mr. Najarian, are you?
That's all.
Okay, Frank, and then Councilmember.
Yeah, I wanted to make the point that Mr. Starbird was making, that in fact, financially, we would wind up spending as much money rehabbing the building as just making it a wider passage through. And then I want to add, in the event that the artist and others abscond with the neon signs in the middle of the night and go to Baltimore or Chicago or wherever else or Miami Beach, well, what's left in their wake? A beautiful building that's been redone, that it served as a museum in the past, and someone else will be plugged in. I don't believe that's going to happen, but
interesting choice of words, plugged in. Ms. Friedman.
Since somebody asked, who is paying the utilities? Who's paying for all of the wattage in this building with all this neon?
We've indicated in the letter of intent that it would be the tenant, Mona, would pay for all the utilities. And if that's how you direct us this afternoon, that's what we'll negotiate into our lease.
Yes, I'm going to support this idea. But having said that, I want to express some concerns. They're not for debate with my colleagues. They're just my personal opinion. I've sat here since 1997, so I have some thoughts. I worked with Donahue Shriver in 97 when they were going to develop the town center before Rick Caruso came along. Somewhere along the line, or in all this discussion and all the plans, we're going to acquire the land on the east side and open it up to open space, period. Somewhere along the line that changed. Maybe I was asleep at the switch. I don't know where it changed that we're going to preserve those buildings. We had to acquire those buildings. I don't know what the cost was, but it wasn't cheap. Probably in the millions to acquire it and relocate the tenants that were there somewhere else so we could acquire it, tear the buildings down to make open space. All of a sudden, Mona's coming in. I hope it succeeds. I know, personally, I feel like I've been burned twice up here on people that are, one on somebody coming in, another not coming in, and that's the chess park. I voted against it, and I think it's still a loser. Nobody's in the thing, and we spent $750,000 or more on that. The other was Noisewood, and they came in here and we subsidized it big time. And then they left, and they went to Cal State LA. Then they got turned off by that, and they want it back again. And they wanted money again. Now they're in Pasadena. Now, I'm voting for this. I hope it succeeds. I'm into sports. I'm not into opera or museums. That's just me. That's not debatable. I like USC football, even though they lose once in a while, and that's just life. But I'm down at the Americana at least 3 times a week because my granddaughter likes to run over the grass lawn. And we go to Gigi's, whatever. And I'll tell you, other than Saturday, Caruso Avenue is the weakest link in the Americana. I've learned over the years, you need anchors. side. If Mona's going to be an anchor, it's going to be across a 6-lane road with medium. And I've stood there many times looking across and saying, okay, will people in the Americana walking in the least used road, Russo Avenue, look over, see the neon lights, go to the intersection, push the button for the signal, and go across and come back? I don't know. I hope it works as an anchor on that side. The more illumination that is provided, the more likely. Right now, if you're at Pickleberry, whatever that was that my family always goes to, they can look across and see it. That's a big draw over there near that corner. If it works, I would like to see the revenue and expenditures from Mona. I presume if they're not making much money, it's under that old adage, location, location, location. And wherever they're at, where they're going to come to is going to be far superior than where they were. So I sincerely hope it works, because it'll be a great thing in Glendale. But those are my concerns, and I hope I'm all wet on them. We'll find out. So I'm ready to vote for it.
Okay. All right, let me also weigh in. First of all, I appreciate the comments from my colleague, but I also had a note to myself. I also wanted to mention Councilmember Najarian, because this has been a discussion that's been percolating around uninformally for a little while, and Councilmember Najarian was every bit as involved in looking at this, watching it, helping to bring this forward to a point that we could have a discussion. So I want to thank him for that. In a strange sense for me, this is partly the result. So if you want to blame somebody, you can also blame the ICSC conference, because part of this came from my first trip as an elected official to the ICSC conference in Las Vegas, and taking a little stroll down to see what was billed as the Outdoor Neon Museum along Fremont Avenue, and seeing an interesting concept that wasn't immediately translatable in my mind to Glendale, but something was there in the idea of using neon and electrically illuminated signs, kinetic signs, to cause people to move from one point to another, and thinking about trying to tie what are our two premier retail areas, the Americana and the Galleria, to mid-brand, and how that might adapt itself. And that prompted me to begin an internet search about what were the neon assets in the greater LA area. And there was this wonderful site, Neon Mona. And I went to the site, and what to my wondering eyes should appear but a sign or a display saying, "We're looking for a new home." My first attempt at making a contact was not terribly successful, but it's nice to be an elected official once in a while, and I could turn to Mr. Lansfam's department, Mr. Hagani's department, and say, can we see if there's a contact that can be made? And so we got some basic information that ultimately led to a very interesting meeting with the city manager, which was simply to find that they were still looking for a home all this time later, a permanent location, I should say. I'm very happy that Mona will be hopefully coming to our downtown area and will be an asset. Let me make a couple of comments here in addition to those niceties. Some of the things that were mentioned, like classes, instruction, workshops, that's not just something that Mona proposes to do, that's what Mona does. Programming, having an evening of jazz or poetry reading in combination with neon in their gallery and museum space is not just something they're planning to do, it's something Mona does. The neon cruises with their very unique bus the bus tours that take you through various areas of Southern California, Mid-Wilshire, the Broadway district in downtown LA, I assume, Chinatown perhaps, Hollywood, and so on. That's not something they're proposing to do. It's something they already do successfully. School outreach, etc. This is not an organization that fell together last week. 1981 you were founded, correct? So by my math, that's about 28 years. And that's a good stretch for a contemporary museum of contemporary art in any form. Look, the city of Glendale may never have a Norton Simon Museum. As a lifelong resident, I've resigned myself to that fact. We may never have a Norton Simon Museum, but we have in Mona an opportunity to establish Glendale in the area of arts and culture in our downtown, and in particular the industrial arts, which is, I think, where we can excel. To take a space that we would have spent the same amount of money virtually to create a 100-foot wide pass-through, adapt it to a 50-foot pass-through, and have a built-in group to activate that passageway, and to bring these other programs to our city and to help to activate not just the area across the street from Americana, but also to help activate our Boulevard of Cars, Brand Boulevard of Cars, that kind of opportunity, and to activate Mid-Brand. These are great opportunities for our city. I'm very pleased that we're at this point. I hope all goes well with our discussions and negotiations. I'm going to go to my colleague, Mr. Weaver, in just a second. He has his hand up. But I also want to thank my colleagues for having an open mind on this. And you're right, Mr. Weaver, there are questions to be answered, and hopefully we will. Can we put neon in the chess park? Maybe that would...
Anything would work.
Okay.
I want to have students paint murals on the walls. Instead, we put shrubs.
All right, Mr. Weaver.
I think it's extremely important after hours to have that open area lit, security cameras. You're going to have neon treatments inside and out, vandalism. Any kids could go in there and knock out a whole bunch of those so easily. We have it lit and security cameras. Anybody goes in, tries to do it, police will get a good lead on who they're going after. All we need is have it dark over there without all the lights out. A few stones, hammer, or anything go in, especially if there's a number of neon lights outside. I would hope the museum itself has a security system. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments from the council? Okay, thank you.
I'll move the...
Mr. Mohill, I'm not going to go back to the public again. I'm sorry.
I'll move the item.
We have a motion
Second.
and a second. Mr. Kasakian, if you call the roll, please.
Agency members Friedman,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Chairman Draymond.
Happily, yes.
At
Okay,
6B
thank
is
you.
Director of Development Services regarding proposed stimulus for the neighborhood business districts to be used for marketing during 2009-2010 holiday season. At B1 is resolution appropriating $37,000 to provide funds for the Glendale Business District holiday stimulus.
Okay, Mr. Kasakian, do we have any cards on this one?
No.
Okay. Well, let's see. Mr. Weaver is asking, do I want a motion? Yes, ultimately, but is there some discussion?
Well, I have a letter. I received a letter from Dale Dawson, who's the president.
I'll tell you what, before we do that, let me go to Phil Lanzafame, our Director of Development Services, and just get a tiny bit of background on this.
Mr. Chairman, mayors, members of the redevelopment agency, earlier this year, you asked us to come up with a campaign to help small business that was feeling the effects of the economy and perhaps may not have had the resources to promote their way out of a bad situation. We have since received some direction from you. We've gone out with an RFP for a campaign, a PR firm, advertising firm, to help us with that campaign. Fact of the matter is we're not going to be finished with that for the all-important fourth quarter. So the proposal here today is to take some of that money that would have been dedicated to the campaign and infuse it directly to the 5 recognized neighborhood business districts to help them supplement their holiday promotions, which begin earlier and earlier, but Halloween is probably the beginning of the, quote, holiday season. So they could use that money very immediately. So we brought this to you. We suggest $7,500 to each of the recognized business districts to be used for holiday promotion.
All right, and you might, just for the record, that breaks down to what for each of these groups?
$7,500.
And that is out of the
Stimulus.
out of the funds that were.
That is correct. One time. Good point. One time for this holiday season, they would come out of the Economic Development Program, which is where we were funding the Buy Glendale or campaign, advertising campaign.
All right. Mr. Quintero, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I received a email from Dale Dawson, who's the president of the Montrose Shopping Park Association, and let me read the email. He wasn't able to be here this afternoon. It says, on behalf of the Montrose Shopping Park Association, I am writing to you as mayor of the city of Glendale to express the MSBA's encouragement and support for a decision by your agency to grant additional funds to Glendale's local business districts this year. With the economic downturn affecting the small businessman as never before, and every advantage that can be taken in this fourth quarter holiday season could help make the difference between remaining in business or closing one's doors in 2010. The MSBA, with the additional monies from the redevelopment agency, would seek to add a direct mail vehicle to promote Glendale's official Old Town district and or explore an incremental purchase of radio spots to drive traffic from outlying areas into our town. If approved, MSBA proposes to make good and timely use of funds by thus layering onto our anniversary activities like the Christmas gift guide, holiday lighting, and decor throughout the shopping park, and the Old Town Christmas trolley and other street activities. So every possible advantage will be needed in the next 3 months. Thanks for your consideration, and it's signed Dale Dawson, president of Montrose Shopping Park.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Weaver, then Mr. Najari.
7,500 per, and you have 5?
5 of them.
That's 37,500. This says 37,000.
37.5
on the agenda page.
The report does, it's the error on the agenda, should be 37.5, it says 37.
I didn't look inside.
Yeah?
Okay.
The resolution also
Good catch.
makes that amount.
Once in a while I'm awake.
Mr. Najari.
The city clerk took the $500.
Oh, yeah, it was his fault. He's not smiling.
I think it's great that we heard from the Montrose MSPA and what they're going to be doing, and they've got a detailed list. Are we going to have any, is this going to be any strings attached to this money? Are we going to have any oversight, or are we just going to put our good faith in their continued, in the shopping park's continued?
My recommendation to you, and I said twice in this meaning, that would be my recommendation, that it be used for holiday promotion. And we already have a process set up in how we reimburse for the normal assistance or the annual assistance that we give. I would suggest that we use the same type of format, that they demonstrate that it is for holiday promotion, and then we reimburse those on a as-used basis.
So if they don't use it, then we wouldn't disperse it. Fine with that.
For example, with the typical $15,000 that is annually distributed to each of these groups, at one point, and I don't know if it's still how it is done, at one point, actually receipts were, submitted. At least in my day, that's how it was done. I don't know if it's still done that way.
We do. We ask for receipts as well as an originally signed request detailing what those costs were.
Any other questions or comments?
I'll move the item if you're
Second.
looking for a motion,
With the 37.5.
unless you had comments. You're reflecting. You sure you weren't an accountant, Mr. Weaver?
I was just a little engineer.
I'll move it, yes, with the
Correct amount.
clarification by Mr. Weaver, 37.5.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Let's call roll.
Agency members: Friedman,
Yes.
Jarian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Chairman Draymond.
Yes. All right. Next item.
Any agency member or staff comments?
Okay. Hearing none,
Move to adjourn.
Second.
we are adjourned. Thank you.